In today's photo deconstruction, I photograph an avant-garde beauty look, and to give it a lot of impact, I use shutter drag and color grading. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here, and no matter how busy I get, I try to make time to play. Time to play with my creative team to make images where it's just for the sake of making something beautiful. And so I call these creative play days, and on those days, we shoot 5, 6, 7, 8 different looks. And I ask my team, what do they want to create? In addition to things that I've had on my checklist. So I'm regularly saving images on Instagram or Pinterest, things that I'm attracted to. I like this makeup. I like this lighting. I like this color grade. And then it's the creative play days where I get to experiment with them. So a long time ago, I had saved a bunch of images of pearl makeup. And so I went online, I went on Amazon, wherever it was, and I bought a whole bunch of pearl appliques. And then they sat there for years, like literally years in a box. And I was waiting for a good opportunity to bring them out. And so I mentioned this to my hairstylist, Lynn, my makeup artist, Joanne, and on one of our creative play days, they decided to go all in with the pearls and completely cover the subject's face and hair with these little pearl appliques. So this is what they presented to me, this beautiful makeup. And then I have to decide with my photography, what can I do that showcases the makeup without overpowering it? And so for this look, I actually tried a variety of things. In one shot, I illuminated the subject only with a flashlight, just using paint with light and long exposure. In another shot, I went with something that was a little softer, with dappled light, with warm and desaturated hues. And then finally, I ended up with what you see here, something with analogous cool colors and shutter drag. So I want to show you how we got this image, both with lighting, as well as talking about my in-camera creative techniques. Oh, and then also I want to show you what was in camera versus what was achieved with my color grade. So to begin with, since we talked about the concept, let's go take a look at our lighting. For this image, I used 3 different strobes, a main light, a background light, and a fill light. That is something I'll do very commonly because it gives me a lot of control. It doesn't mean the fill light needs to be super bright. It doesn't mean the background needs to be super bright. In fact, if you look at this original image, it barely looks like there is any fill. I had it at a very low power, but it makes sure that those shadows don't go pure black. So if I want some detail, if I want some separation, it's there. All right, so looking at this, let's actually begin with our main light. So the main light is over here. It's the left-hand side, and I'm using a Westcott optical spot with the kit lens, and then in it, there's a dappled gobo. So it looks kind of like leaves cut out on it. And what it does is it gives you a little bit of irregularity to the light. Instead of it just being one flat, hard light, it makes some areas a little brighter, some areas a little darker, and it can make a more complex light, which can be pretty interesting for your photography if you want something to look like it has more depth or maybe feel a little bit more environmental. In fact, if you look at the background, you can actually see where some of the gobo, the dappled light, is hitting the background. You don't see this in the final image because it was not in my frame, in my composition, but it just shows you what the gobo looks like that was in that optical spot. I was using a kit lens. That's the 150 millimeter that came with the original optical spot. And that allows me to illuminate face, maybe even chest, with really bright, crisp light. So that's my main light. Now let's talk about my fill light. The fill light is what you see over here in the top left-hand corner. It is a bare strobe, and I just have it bounced into the back corner of the room. Anytime I want to have a fill light that doesn't have directionality, it's just soft, it lifts up the shadows everywhere, I just bounce it. And so, of course, it depends on how far the wall is behind you and how high your ceilings are. But this is something that I've done in pretty much every studio I've ever been in, is found the right place to bounce a light to act as a lifting fill light. So that's what I have here, no modifier. And then, of course, I can turn the power up and down to control the amount of fill. So then our third and final strobe you can see behind the subject. This is a Photo D2 with a 20-degree grid. In other words, it is a wide grid that just allows a little bit of glow and separation, and we're actually on a Savage Universal blue mist background. I could have used the gel, but I wanted it to be kind of a consistent color throughout. I have the background light pointed low, so it would be brighter beneath her shoulders and then fade to shadow towards the top of her head. And so if we go to the final image, you see that. But what's really important about this is that I don't allow it to fall to pure black at the top of the frame. There's still some separation there, which I think is really important for creating a nice balance to the image, keeping her separated throughout. So you can see optical spot, balanced fill, low 20-degree grid on the background, And if you see our final image, dappled light on the face, so it's uneven, textured. Fill light, which is a little detail to the lips, right? If there was no fill light, her lips here would be completely black. Also, the bounced fill was really important because it creates giant reflections around the room. Even if they're really dark, that's what you're seeing sparkling on all the gemstones. Anywhere that those pearls would be in shadow, like on the top of her head or on her mouth, if I did not have that light bouncing back into the room, you wouldn't see this little specular highlight on top of them. That's what allows them to show up without having them directly illuminated. So that becomes really important. And then, of course, our final light, you see creating that gradient on the background. All right, before we talk about our post-processing, let's talk about the gear used. I was shooting with the Canon R5 and my new favorite lens, the Canon RF 24-105 2.8 lens. It is versatile, it's sharp, it's fantastic. I was shooting at f4, ISO 800. I basically shot so that the camera was a little more sensitive to light to help me out with the optical spot so I could shoot it at a lower power. But the key here, the thing that is important is that 1/20, so 1/20th of a second. I did something to allow me to shoot at a slow exposure, slow shutter speed. And that's called shutter drag. I teach shutter drag in many different ways. I have several YouTube videos. I'll link to a couple in the description. I also have it in my Creative Lighting Guide 1 and 2. And it's basically allowing the strobes to freeze things in place, then using a slower shutter speed to pick up ambient light, and then doing some sort of movement with the camera to create a blur. So going back over here, if I zoom in, it's still beautifully sharp. The eyes are sharp, the skin is sharp. But what I did is I used 1/20th of a second, and then with that lens, the 24-105, I zoomed slightly, and it's picking up the reflections on the pearls. Now, I didn't have a specific continuous light. It was just the continuous light in the space. Maybe it's the modeling lights on the subject, a little bit of light bouncing off the back of the room. But when I zoomed, it created that little bit of starburst effect, which takes a still image, gives it a little bit of energy, and takes an avant-garde image and makes it even more creative. So this is where the final image ended up. And let me show you where we began. So this is what I had shooting straight out of camera. Now, just to note a couple things that drew my attention. I thought that the kind of the hump on the back of the neck, it's just kind of how she was sitting. I wanted to smooth that out. I definitely wanted to give her a brighter catch light in the eyes. The one on the right happened to give a more specular highlight, so I knew I wanted to do that. And then I had to decide, did I want to warm up the image and go with warm and desaturated colors, or maybe I wanted to play off of that mist blue background. That is actually the direction I ended up going, is I went and created an analogous color scheme. So that means colors next to each other on the color wheel. So I took everything, the background, the highlights, the shadows, and I moved them to cool tones. So we already have the background set. What I did is I added cyan to the highlights and blue to the shadows. It was kind of a cyan green to the highlights. And so you can see just how much of a big difference this made. This was all done in raw processing. So this is before I ever went into Photoshop. So I popped the highlights a little bit, added some clarity, cyan highlights, blue shadows, and it makes a really big difference. So now a couple of other things that I noticed that I wanted to fix. She's got a little texture here that I wanted to get rid of. I did this retouching myself because I kind of did it around some of the pearls, also cleaning up some of the edges where the pearls are hanging off, maybe putting 1 or 2 pearls in an empty spot. So that is the sort of thing that I'm analyzing. So this was straight out of camera with my initial color grade and raw processing, and then this is the retouch. So the major things you see is smoothing out of the back, cleaning up a couple pearls, cleaning up the skin a little bit, and then I actually took the eye closest to camera and lifted it up a little bit because I felt like it was really drawing us in, but just looked a little drooped. So I lifted it up and brightened it. I also darkened down the eye furthest from camera because it was gathering a little bit too much attention. So I actually gave it a little bit of shading and contouring to match the other eye. So straight out of camera versus the final direction I went. There are so many different ways I could have taken this color grade. There's no right or wrong answer, but I leaned into it because it felt cool and mysterious, and I played off the color on the background. I love my creative play days because we get to create beautiful images like these with no restrictions. Everyone is there to make a good image, to exchange creative ideas, and just make something beautiful to share with the world. So that's what we did with this image. And there are very few times that you're going to have a client ask you to cover them in pearls. And so sometimes it's setting aside a creative play day to do just that. Now, if you're interested in learning about some of these lighting techniques or maybe photographing images that have the same creative makeup, I recommend you check out the links in the description below to my intensive workshops. For example, I have a workshop coming up that is themed Avant-Garde beauty. And so you're going to be able to photograph looks just like this with some of the most talented hair and makeup artists in the world creating the looks for you. Or if you're interested in fashion photography or vintage looking photography, or you want to learn creative or advanced lighting, I cover all of that in my intensives. So be sure to check that out and hopefully you can join me in person. And if not, I have tons of creative tutorials at learnwithlindsay.com, from lighting recipe guides to classes on gels and more. If you want to see the gear used to make this image, be sure to check out the links in the description below. And of course, visit adorama.com. And if you've enjoyed this photo deconstruction, I encourage you to like, subscribe, share with friends, because I have many more just like this one coming your way. See you next time, guys.